And now we start the official program with Klas Karlgren, who comes from Sweden, from Karolinska Institutet. You're welcome, Klas.
Thank you. I will be talking about the research that has been carried out and is carried out in the KNORC project. And I'll jump right into, let's see if I find, here we go. The background of this project is that we supposedly live in a knowledge society where things are changing very rapidly. The existing jobs are partly disappearing and new ones are created. And formal education is not quite preparing the students for the skills that are needed, the competencies that are needed for these jobs. And concerns have been raised regarding this problem, and studies show that students themselves are not always happy with the competencies and skills they're prepared with. So something needs to be done about this, and our education needs to have strategies to handle this challenge. In the background of this project is also the debate going on in theories about learning, about where to put our emphasis. And you can see here that a very influential paper by Anna Svard, where she discussed different metaphors of learning, what is emphasized. And she suggested that I was supposed to show the two first ones. She suggested that there are two metaphors. There's the acquisition metaphor, learning as acquiring knowledge from experts or some kind of resources, an individual emphasis on what goes on in the mind of learners in terms of cognitive structures, for instance. And this is contradicted to the participation metaphor, where learning is social. You're enculturated into a society or a culture of learning. You pick up the habits and the language and the activities, and learning is viewed as something, as an activity, as knowing something rather than an individual knowledge structure. So this is an interesting discussion, but the past 10 or 15 years or so, there has also been a discussion about how learning can be viewed as collaboratively creating something, and typically using various types of artifacts and tools to do this. And so a third metaphor has been suggested, namely the knowledge creation metaphor, which puts, these are theories that put emphasis on exactly that, how we collaboratively create knowledge and how we do that using various artifacts and by utilizing tools of different kinds. Previously, also there has been quite a bit of work put into formulating design principles which emphasize activities, educational activities which promote collaborative learning and collaboration to create something among a group of learners. And the first design principle, I'll walk through these very briefly to give you a hint if you haven't heard of them before. I know many of you are familiar with them already. But the first one, and perhaps the most important one, is organizing activities around shared objects. So you organize educational activities around building something. It can be a document or a web page or a physical prototype or some kind of design that you work on for a while. And the activities are around this over a period of time. Secondly, you support the integration of personal and collective agency, so that you don't only think about your own learning, but you also take responsibility for the learning of a group of learners. And you discuss and plan how the group learns, and you review it and reflect upon it. Thirdly, you emphasize development and creativity through transformations and through reflection. So, for instance, you transform knowledge through different forms. So, if you, for instance, have some kind of tacit knowledge or practices, you perhaps reflect on those tacit practices to learn something from it, and vice versa. If you have some conceptual knowledge, you try to apply that in very practical cases. And the fourth principle is fostering long-term processes of knowledge advancement. So you don't see learning as only happening here and now, but you also try to emphasize learning over a longer period. So what you're doing perhaps in a course is the products of that you hopefully can use in the next implementation of the course. So what the students do is looked at in the next implementation by a new group of students who take a look at that and perhaps extend the ideas that were developed in the first case. So you have a more long-term perspective of these activities. And fifthly, promoting cross-fertilization of knowledge practices and artifacts across communities and institutions. This principle emphasizes the importance of collaborating and interacting with experts in other fields or outside the local educational community. And I'll say something about the sixth one, which is providing flexible tools for developing artifacts and practices. This is important. It's important to provide tools that allow students or learners to collaborate and to create something together, and also to reflect on and analyze your learning activities. So these are the six design principles. A lot can be said about them, but they have been very central to the project. And in the project, we have a lot of cases that have been carried out as courses and implemented with these design principles in the background. And as you can see in this Word, there are topics. There's a huge range of topics, from electronics to medical education to religion and cooking. The span is enormous, and we also have learning in different levels, from higher education to secondary school in different schools in 4 different countries. But the design principles are there in the background, and as this is a part of an EU project, we have this work package which is focused on research. And the research here has its aim at reflecting on these cases and how these design principles have been implemented, and also supporting the pedagogical work. This is and this has been done in basically 3 areas, you could say. The first one is looking at the teachers' expectations and their plans before the courses were run. What were their plans? What were they hoping to achieve? I'll say something about that in a while. And then secondly, looking at the teachers' descriptions and experiences of the courses during the courses and also after them. And thirdly, looking at the students' experiences and how they described the knowledge practices that they were, or the courses that they were exposed to. So firstly, the teachers' expectations and plans before the course begin. We were interested in exactly that what were their goals and their expectations and plans. And in all the cases that we studied, we asked, I'm sorry for the slide which looks strange on this computer, but we had basically 5 questions that we asked. We asked about how the design principles were implemented. We asked about how they organized collaboration. We asked what kinds of tools they used and how they planned that use. And we asked about the challenges that motivated the implementation. And we asked about issues of concern. And as there's so many cases, I won't go into any details of all the cases, but I'll show you a slide of the 5th one, the issues of concern, because there were some worries in the beginning. Some teachers, the different colors of these bubbles here indicate different cases in different countries. So someone might have said that some students might prefer to work individually and will not work well in groups. That was a valid concern, I think. And others were concerned with how can we evaluate the performance of a team and the individual when they're collaborating all the time. Another worry. And there were concerns about the digital literacy of the teachers and the students as well, and whether it was even possible to actually construct or design something in a short period as a course. So then we looked at the teachers' experiences during the courses and after, and that's what we were interested in. How did they describe these modified and implemented courses? We used a number of different methods. observations and of different kinds, reflective questioning in writing. Some had online diaries, and we had interviews mostly afterwards. And then overall we heard that, as you can see in these quotes, the model was implemented successfully, many teachers would say. They would say, we adopted the new pedagogical practices and students learn new knowledge work practices, but sometimes they would be self-critical and say we didn't plan the processes well enough. All of us will continue, but they would also say we will continue with the same process the next time. And others would say that we did implement the design principle, but perhaps not all. For instance, in this case, number 5 was not implemented because they didn't have any interaction with experts in the field. But overall, quite positive. But there were some interesting tensions that arose also. So some teacher would say something like this: now that students are collaborating towards a shared outcome, evaluating the personal contributions of each team member has become difficult, which is understandable, because the individual contributions become a little bit blurred, you might think. But at the same time, there are new things going on. Students are collaborating with these tools, and the tools leave traces. They create models, and the process is viewable in these tools. So other teachers would also say that students visualize their problem analysis and solutions, making it easier for the teachers to assess the students. So there's these double messages coming from the teachers. Another tension that could be observed here is that new practices were successfully used for improving obligatory courses for a large group of students, not only in those small voluntary courses with especially motivated students. So it seemed to work for large groups of students. But other teachers were concerned that we're introducing these complex real-world design tasks with tools, and this highlights even more the difference between the motivated teams and the students that just wanted to get over the course. So they observed also that the scores were, the distribution of the scores in tests became clusters in the top and in the bottom, and not so many in the middle. So scores were sort of polarized here, and maybe this was an effect of the implemented course in some cases. And then the third part, as I mentioned, was that we looked also at the students' experiences. Our question was, how did they reflect on the knowledge work practices related to the implementation of the courses? And we used a number of different methods here. I will say something about the 3 first here, which the first one is a little scale that was used. Then we used open questions, and then we have developed an instrument, a research instrument, to study contextual knowledge practices, to capture the students' views. But also other methods were used, like online diaries, group interviews, observations, and analysis of what they were actually producing. So firstly, we asked, we had this scale called the Knowledge Work Competency Scale, which is 7 statements that were answered before and after courses. And as you can see, there are items that were rated: I know how to organize my studies purposefully, I know how to analyze theoretically the topics to be studied, I know how to discuss with others about the topics to be studied, I know how to take advantage of common discussions for deepening my understanding, I know how to work in a goal-oriented way in a group, I know how to develop productions, there's things that are developed in a course, and I know how to use technology in multiple ways during collaborative work. These were all evaluated by the students, and a typical, this is from one case I think in Finland, a typical result would look something like this. They were fairly high in the beginning, above 3 on this one scale from 1 to 5, and then after the course it would be higher, closer to 4. And maybe the difference is not humongous here, but it's very typical that it was higher in every case. There were very few exceptions to this. So this was at least some kind of indication that we were doing the right thing in these courses, that they raised the evaluation. The opposite might have been a concern. Then we had open questions such as these. How would you... Okay, thanks. How would you characterize your overall experience in the course? How would you characterize your own participation? What was positive? What was challenging? How well were your goals met, etc.? And if we just ask the first subjective question, we noticed that wasn't always very useful. They would say, some students would say, this was the best course during my education, but in the same course, other students would say, this was poor, or this was bad, but it was funny. So I at least didn't find this very useful, but asking about what was, what they liked was, they liked the collaboration, but on the other hand, they thought others in the groups often did not collaborate very well. So they were, when they noticed this, they started to discuss setting up rules for the collaboration, which was a practical approach, I think, for them. And as I mentioned, we also created I will say just not go into details into this, a lot of work has been put into developing an instrument to assess the competencies related to collaboration. This has been developed during the project, and it's a scale of 29 items producing 7 scales that can be used to characterize courses. So I won't say more about this. Let's skip that. I'll just mention the last part that I wanted to say is that we are also, as we're analyzing these courses, we're creating educational design patterns, which is because we get these varied research results, we're trying to identify what is it that seems to work, what are the successful solutions here for the educational problems that we have. So we use this type of structure to identify solutions which could be maybe used in other courses as well. And they're called educational design patterns, and they have this specific structure. And we have a number of them. These boxes here represent different patterns, and some of them are related to different topics. You can see in the top. So I think as we're running out of time here, I'll try to end here and say that we overall, I think the design principles, the feeling was that they were implemented successfully, not all of them in all cases, but when we look at them, there are some interesting tensions. They require a lot of planning, and they bring up some new challenges, for instance, about assessment, as I was mentioning, and maybe there's a polarization that the very motivated students really like this, the others maybe don't like it as much every time. I'm not sure that is a bad thing, or that could be discussed. Maybe it's a good thing. But also I think one interesting observation is that the students who really have problems, they learn quite a lot from this. And we learn from looking at these students who do have the problems, and to try to identify what is interesting here. These patterns might be helpful for us, I think. So I'll finish there.
Thank you.